All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday, another session of the MSP Initiative. It's a little rainy, a little floody here in the Northeast. Have a little hurricane deciding to roll up the coast. But hey, I still got power, and here we are. Bringing back good friend of everyone, I think, Jamison West, back to the MSP Initiative. Jamison, how you doing?
Good. Good to
Awesome.
be here. Not so cold and rainy here in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I'm sure it's like 120 degrees.
It's 107.
All right. It's all good. 107, right? Dry heat, yeah, whatever they call it. So we were just talking right before we jumped on. So since you've last joined MSP Initiative, you traded out your diesel car for Teslas.
Yeah, had to make the move. You know why?
All right.
Here's why. I'm not a big car guy. I'm not a big car guy. I'm a tech geek, and now I'm just driving a computer. So I like driving a computer.
Fair
And
enough.
also, fortunately, when I went all in, I bought a little stock too, so that didn't hurt.
Did you see the other day Elon Musk came out and said that the pyramids were built by aliens?
I wouldn't run anything by him. It could be. He might have
Right.
some insight. Maybe he's visited their planet and we just don't know it.
You know, he could have. But I love how like the Egyptian artifact commission guy comes out and was like, yeah, why don't you come and like visit the joint and then like make up your mind.
We can talk about that.
So things, obviously time has progressed. We haven't talked probably for about 5 weeks, 6 weeks maybe.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, how you feeling about things, right? I mean, are people okay? Are people feeling like they've got a handle of what's happening up to this point? Like, what's the general vibe?
In general, I feel like, and through our work with everything I'm doing is connecting to multiple MSPs. So I'm getting a pretty good flavor for what's going on out there. And I think right now it feels okay, but I also feel people are kind of still holding their breath a little bit. PPP running out, kind of going, okay, what does that mean when the government stops propping, right? And who's really, once the prop gets yanked out, like how far do things fall? And it's anybody's guess. And we've had a lot of conversations about that, and that's going to be interesting. But people are kind of, they're tightening up and being smart. And I think for the most part, people who leveraged PPP and idle correctly, and who've managed their cash and their business well, are, they're ready to come out of this strong. So, most of the folks I'm talking to, mitigated some initial losses, and they're in a good spot.
That's good. That's absolutely good.
IT services isn't going anywhere. I mean, if anything, the industry's poised to grow, but the smart ones are going to come out on top. So it's just, it's getting your ducks in a row and being smart.
Yeah, no, 100%. So some timely current events that's worth doing a drive-by on. What is your opinion on the TikTok security conversation / potential ban / potential? Now all of a sudden Apple and Microsoft are competing maybe to buy this company. Yep. Like what's your feeling?
It's way out of my world, but how Microsoft leverages TikTok's a little bit beyond me. But but the article I read on it was like, there's a point where something of that level of value goes on such a fire sale that, what the heck? It's worth taking a stab. But I mean, who knows? But now they're competing, driving the price up. You'd think people would probably drop. We'll see. I think it's silly.
Somebody said that they were going to replace Outlook with TikTok, and just have all video messages.
Brilliant. Good luck with that.
Be a game changer.
Everybody has to dance before their message.
100%, right? I mean, that could be really intriguing. So topic for today, right, is, hey, there's now so many avenues of communication now. It's almost like we've thrown too many ways to communicate, and it's now becoming more complicated to even line up just a simple meeting.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's talk about that noise, right? Because I got Teams, I got Zoom, I got Outlook, I got 30 apps on my various screens here. I mean, I'm literally having to check multiple things hourly just to keep up.
Yeah, no, I have the same problem, and people are getting pretty frustrated. It takes a lot of time. It takes a whole lot of time to manage. I've got, between Slack, WhatsApp, Teams, Facebook Messenger, texts. I probably got 8 apps on my phone that I use just to message because people have different preferences, and I'm willing to tolerate the technology, but it's a waste. And it's really, we've been pretty focused on the Times S side on kind of what that looks like and how we mitigate those types of issues. It's been frustrating, and I think what happened is like everybody kind of accelerated. How do we tighten up and make this stuff simpler and more streamlined? When COVID hit, really, it was interesting. It was interesting to kind of see people just really need to, button down and get a little more efficient.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, at some point, like I remember back in, I think it was a CRN event back in the day, and they brought this CIO on from I forget what big company, and he's like, "Yeah, we're looking to have less and less vendors, not add more and more because we want to simplify our world." And I was like, "Well, that sucks for anyone trying to sell into those guys." That's the thing that I thought about, but they like come full circle, right? Several years later, you kind of take that same concept to what apps you're using, what ecosystem you're using, what ERPs you're using, what communications you're using, what everything you're using. And now all of a sudden there's an app for damn near everything. And as much as people say, hey, it's all integrated, it's not as pretty as it all sounds. So like, I feel like there's so much noise now that I got to work extra hard, to actually get through it now. Like I feel like COVID, everybody was in front of their computer, and now everybody was paying attention. But I think like we've passed the point of super attentiveness, and we're kind of getting back to too much noise.
Yeah, it can be that way. I mean, we had a problem. I mean, so from a SaaS perspective, and you and I both living in that world for a while, everybody struggles with what we affectionately call the YAT problem, the yet another tool problem. And what happened, I felt like when COVID hit, what happened was there was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction from a small handful of players who were like, I'm wiping out everything without really thinking about the ROI of the tool. Like you just saw a bunch get ripped out right away. And now it seems like that's really gone. I think that happened like a week or two. And now we've seen for companies who can show ROI or either core to the business or show clear ROI in their usage, it's actually been COVID's I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it has certainly been a positive thing for certain businesses who create those types of efficiencies. So, we've been really fortunate at Times S to see our business grow rapidly through these times, just out of creating efficiencies. And we haven't really talked about what we do there, but this inability for people to communicate clearly, coordinate time, waste time doing that stuff, being able to bottle that up and be really, really efficient has been critical. It's all about time. People are trying to save time. People are trying to figure out just better ways to approach and create a better customer experience. That's really been an issue. How do we create it? And I think people are struggling, because MSPs were used to going on site, dealing with whatever, and now everybody's at home and trying to figure out how to coordinate and connect with people. And email is not the right tool for that stuff. Already we're going to Teams and Slack, but what you'll see on Teams and Slack is that MSPs aren't using Teams and Slack a lot to communicate with their clients. They're mostly using phones and email, right? So instant messaging is not necessarily a thing in that world for many MSPs yet. So how do we just create a simplicity and a good user experience in that world is really important.
So let's talk about user experience for a second, because I feel like the brands that are dealing with consumers directly, right? The internet providers, the cell phone companies, like obviously now with COVID, all this curbside pickup, right? Instead of me going into a Best Buy, right? I order online, they show up, they walk right up to my car and I'm on my way, right? So I feel like there's been like a jump forward because there was no other choice, right? Over the last few months because people couldn't go into the building until recently.
Yeah.
But like, let's talk about the consumerization from a user experience standpoint and bring it into, IT services for a second. I feel like we're behind now. I feel like we were ahead for a bit, and now all of a sudden the big boys have spent a lot of money to polish up that experience. And I feel like, the MSP IT service provider space is kind of behind there. What do you think
Well,
about
and if we're being honest, if you look at a modern, well-built UI or UX from a SaaS app and like the really beautiful apps of the world, those are above the expectation of an MSP, right? An MSP is pretty basic not universally, but traditionally, the user experience and the user interface and the way that they leverage tools is more, it's more function over form. Let's be frank. Like it's been primarily function over form. Those days are changing, and the problem is what you deliver to your clients is representative. So you're the tech company, and you are representing technology to your clients, who are now being delivered in most other experiences a better user experience, right? So we talk about that a lot. Again, going back just specifically to TimeZest, what's the experience when you are trying to coordinate time to work with your IT service provider and it's a couple emails, hey, when are you available? How's noon tomorrow? Back and forth email or eventually a phone call, no meeting request. But you're the technology provider. Well, tools have been out there to handle this kind of stuff. So how do you step up your game as a technology service provider to deliver the experience your customer would expect? And I think that so when we think about the facets of what these applications are doing, it's not only is it creating more efficiency and ROI internally at the IT service provider, but it's changing the whole perception of what they are in terms of a technology provider to their customer. Creating a better user experience is critical. You've got to be able to do that. And some of the tools that MSPs use that connect, if you think about your RMM tool, it's not readily apparent. They're not looking at an interface that is the RMM. So it doesn't matter. All I care about is function. I'm not so concerned about form. But when you're delivering communications to your customer, which was the core of our conversation, you need to bring an experience that is modern and current and it meets the expectations of the customer.
I feel like, listen, we've had a bunch of people here with a lot of great ideas. Recently we had our friend from SolarWinds Enable, Colin Knox, formerly Passportal, and he brought a couple of nuggets to the table that I thought were absolutely brilliant, right? Even at the MSP level, having a partner advisory type and group to help give you real world feedback, right? Because like that brings me back to mapping the customer journey. How often is the MSP really zooming out and saying, are we making it better for our customers? Are they happy with the way we're, doing things? Or are we making it easier for us to do our jobs and have them make it easier for them to communicate with us too, right? There's like a balance that's always kind of out of tilt somewhere along the line, unless you're trying to like fix it, right? So before we even talk about the IT nation, I call it walk down the aisle fatigue, right? Where you take your credit card, you walk by 5 different booths, you come up with, you have all these bolt-ons that you so somehow amassed. You go back home 6 months later, none of them are implemented, by the way, for whatever it's worth. Shouldn't this conversation really start with, hey, have you actually zoomed out and said, if I was a customer engaging my company, what does that feel like on a day-to-day basis? Like, shouldn't that be step one?
Absolutely. And and that starts with, what's your strategy, what's your branding, what's your messaging, who do you want to be to your clients? I'm a big fan of, I'm sure you're quite familiar, but I'm a big fan of story branding, which is the same concept you did. How do you make your customer the hero of the journey instead of you? Again, another traditional thing that MSPs do traditionally quite poorly, myself included in my MSP, very, very poorly until I kind of discovered story branding, which is we're really good at talking about ourselves instead of talking about how you make, how do you market and sell in a way that makes the person you're talking to the hero to their constituents instead of just trying to talk about yourself. And that goes back to the customer journey, right? So how do you make the MSP look better if you're a software vendor? How does an MSP make the individual at the company who's their primary contact look like the hero for bringing them in, right? Like how do you carry that message forward? That's where people need to focus. So and user experience is the core to that.
So like if for somebody that's never done sorry, I guess I have a lot of, it's that whole storm thing going on. So a lot of emergency vehicles floating around. If you talk to a person for the first time, business owner in MSP, leader in an MSP, service manager in an MSP, whatever the title is, and they've never done the customer journey mapping or storybook branding or comic book, session layout, however you want to call it. Where would you send them first to do that? Like, are there resources you would point them to? Like, how do you get through one of those for the first time successful?
Yeah, for us, I mean, in multiple companies now, we've literally used the StoryBrand. So the StoryBrand site's really good. The book is incredible. I've actually leveraged for a couple of websites. There's some free resources on StoryBrand just to literally think about the basics on your website and how you're speaking, not about yourself, but to your customer in terms of making them the hero. So I start there really from a branding perspective, right? How do I tie it to the persona we want to talk to and then make that persona the hero of the journey? And it's a really interesting question. As a matter of fact, they've got a great little layout where you can kind of populate the story. I think it's free too, like a PDF you can download, but like you basically plot out like who's the persona, what do they care about, the whole bit, the traditional marketing pieces, but then it really kind of dovetails beyond generic persona building into the story brand component. What do their constituents care about? How do you make them hero, right? So that's really interesting. Love that.
Yes, so assuming, hey, I've gone through and I figured out what my customer journey is, right? For the different people, right? What does it look like for the end, user who's not the office manager? What does it look like for the office manager? What does it look like for the owner executive, right? Like you got to figure out what this all looks like. The second part is, all right, I realize I have a gap, right? I realize we're not modernized in the way that we're communicating and accepting service requests and dealing with that whole back and forth. I feel, and again, we've had a bunch of people on MSP Initiative that said, hey, before I onboard any new tools, I have to have a requirements list, right? I have to have a couple of checkboxes that I go through to say, hey, is it secure? Is it easy to deploy? Is it easy to use? Is it self-service? Do I have, everybody has different requirements, right? So I feel like, because of the big block tools in the, MSP arena, right? When we talk about the big four all the time, right? And we talk about the ecosystem that kind of revolves around that. I feel like some people have gone to try and duct tape enterprise solutions in, and sometimes there's a square peg round hole, and all of a sudden we've actually now created an entire lane that's not really smooth, right? So from the aspect of what's the criteria the MSP service delivery manager, owner, executive should be looking at when adding these bolt-ons, right? What's the best list of advice or check boxes that you would give to make sure that 6 months later they're not like everyone else, right? They swiped their credit card and never got deployed.
Yeah, I mean, so 21 years in my MSP, we had a rule once we consolidated on our PSA platform, happened to be ConnectWise. Like if it didn't connect to the flow and the processes we were building out, if we had to work out of band, we had to be smart about considering, because there was a couple things that we did that were out of band. It was I mean, but we avoided it to the degree which we couldn't. So sometimes we would we really had to think about what are the man hours, what is the salary cost, the people cost of doing something that isn't fully integrated to our platform. But then we didn't stop there. I think the problem is some people stop there and just stop at the ROI. What does this create in terms of a headache or external perception of how we deliver our services? Because if it's out of band for us, are we also creating an out of band or a poor customer experience for our clients? And that was something that we often didn't originally consider. So that's our second checkbox, right? What are we doing that's costing us internally time and therefore expense that too many MSPs don't think about or they devalue? Like they'll manually do everything and think it's smarter without going, wait a minute, I could put these 4 tools in place for a couple $100 a month and save, an FTE. I've literally seen that where you're like, what is your math? Because it's wrong. Or I'm doing these things out of band and I'm creating a customer experience where they're having to jump through 4 different disconnected hoops to do business with me. So some MSPs do a good job on the ROI side on the front looking internally, not as many do a good job looking externally, right? And I think that's what you're getting at. It's like how do you ensure, because expectations are changing fast. That's kind of where you kicked off the conversation. Expectations are moving rapidly right now. People want a positive experience.
100%. So yeah, you've been out of the game for a minute, right? You've been mostly on the SaaS side of things, right? You sold your MSP, what, now 3 years ago? 4, roughly. Maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, about that ballpark. So, but largely the challenges that occurred 3 or 4 years ago have just been exacerbated coming forward. So, like, what was the main communication gap that you would get when you go and ask your customers, what's not good? What can we do better on? And if we could fix something, what would the number 1, 2, 3 things be?
Everything was around it's the entire initiation of a ticket and triage process. Everything was around how do you clearly understand what I'm needed? How do I get time with you? How do I make sure that we're prioritized? What's your availability? It was always around those types of issues. And we have a lot of conversations with MSPs where their primary concern is like how SLA, responsiveness, but it all comes back to processes around triaging and executing against how tickets are triaged, right? So there's that whole connection. Actually, very few MSPs think that they do a poor job in terms of ultimately bringing a problem to resolution technically. It's the whole customer service experience on the front end that's the problem. Like, people get super frustrated. I see MSPs that lose a bunch of clients, and it's all about miscommunication, not technical deficiencies. It's time and communication. And it's all on the front end. And it's mostly a triage process, which is why you're seeing a lot of movement in the triage process these days. A lot of changes.
No, 100%. So what about things like, did you have a dispatcher? Like some people are still doing like regular monthly on-site maintenances or quarterly business reviews that are happening in, and, assuming COVID's not happening, that kind of stuff. Like, I feel like there is a huge exercise for a human being to burn through days trying to get the calendar right.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's funny, I talked to actually at ConnectWise themselves. They do the same thing. They have quarterly business reviews with their partner base, right? Or they try to. Their account managers probably spend, I talked to multiple, over a quarter of their time just trying to chase partners down and pin them to a time to get together to have the meeting, even when it's virtual, right? And so it's not unlike the experience we had at the MSP. 2 different issues, right? So quarterly business reviews versus actually ticket triage, but ultimately kind of the same problem. On one side, the customer's kind of chasing you to troubleshoot a ticket, and you're trying to coordinate time with some emails and some phone calls. On the other side, you might be trying to chase down the client to coordinate a time to sit down and have a business review or something that's, whatever that might look like. But all of those efforts end up being phone calls, emails, or some disconnected piece of technology, which is really problematic for everybody. What we see most MSPs doing is via phone calls or emails in the ticket trying to coordinate a time, landing on one, which is massively inefficient, right? It's taking, and this is where MSPs get caught up, it's taking either their dispatchers, or if they're self-dispatching as engineers or as account managers, whoever, it's taking a significant amount of their time. But what's the customer experience? Oh, another one of those emails where I got to go look in my calendar and write back and try to figure out. And then by the time they respond, 2 of those spots got booked up. And then it's a nightmare, right? It's a nightmare, and it creates a really poor user experience. And so it's like, how do we like shrink that?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the challenge to some degree is like if there's maybe multiple calendars, right? Like let's say I'm in 2 different business units, right? And I have a calendar in each. Or hey, some people have tried to share my calendar publicly, right? And go to this, like here's my Google calendar, my Office 365 calendar link. Try and figure out where I don't have a spot open, kind of thing. Like like the complexity gets worse with more calendars, more apps, right? I mean, there's just no other way around that. And there's no one app that seems to connect to every tool out there either, right? You kind of need to hone in on where's your master schedule going to be located.
Yeah, so it's been interesting. And the reason that we created TimeZest is what we saw, and I've leveraged multiple calendaring solutions, and I still do leverage other calendaring solutions depending on what the problem I'm trying to solve. But the 2 that we run into the most at TimeZest are, well, first of all, the majority of MSPs out there aren't using a calendaring solution. The ones who are pre-TimeZest were either using Microsoft Bookings, because frankly, 98% of the population we're serving is Office 365. And the problem with Bookings, there's 2 problems. It only will look at your personal calendar. You can't connect, I have a G Suite calendar or a personal, whatever. You can't connect those in. And it doesn't connect to the PSA. So there's totally out of flow. So it's kind of like the first thing I mentioned. It's free. I get it with Office 365. That's great. But it's so out of band and disconnected that it misses my flow. We also ran into Calendly a lot. I'm a big Calendly fan. I love what Calendly, I think the UX is really beautiful. I think they've done a great job. And it connects to almost every calendar I have, except for the PSA, right? It doesn't integrate to the PSA and the workflow and the SLA. And so at TimeZest, what we really did is we said, there's this expectation now from a technology service provider perspective that this should be just part of the model. I mean, people expect to be able to say, hey, here's my calendar, book time against it. It's obvious. We see it so much around us now and it's so convenient. I can just click, pick a spot, done, walk away. It's how we schedule this webinar, right? I mean, no problem, boom, done. But how do we get it into the flow? And the beauty is with TimeZest is if we can get it into the flow where they can use that with their customers, now their customers are seeing their MSP as bringing a modern user experience with a good UI and a good customer experience directly to them. So they're leading the way in terms of technology.
James, you have your hand up. Just go ahead and submit a question or something in the chat box. I'm happy to bring it up and see if we can maybe hit whatever thought you have. So let me ask you this, like one of the main things that comes up with trying to deliver service delivery through a Slack channel, through a Teams channel, through a instant messaging app on your website, chat box that pops up, text messaging is another one that pops up. The problem with all of these avenues is there is no SLA, bearing connection, one. 2, hell, if you can make it a time entry fast enough to make sure that it's like in the system when it was supposed to be. And 3, without the first 2 things, how in the hell am I supposed to report off of that, right? Like, I can't come away with, hey, are my people utilized properly? Are my customers utilized, getting their time properly? Am I oversubscribed? This is the disjointedness we're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been a huge conundrum for a lot of MSPs thinking about like this instant communication channel and how they're going to deal with this. And really, you know, we began dealing with that. We had chat at our MSP years and years ago. So our clients had direct access to chat with us. And we had to have, but if you think about how you service somebody from an IT perspective, depending on the scale of what you're doing, you may need direct communication. You may not be able to work on 5 problems at a time, depending on the complexity of the problem. You may need a focused hour to do something that's more diligent. It may be, so we kind of divided up resources, and there's tools out there that are coming and are already there in terms of Slack and Teams integration to help people are kind of moving down that path. Certainly, we support our clients from a software perspective. We use Intercom within our app, and we can chat with them and support them. That's great, but it doesn't account for the fact that a customer may come to you and they're probably busy and they don't have 30 minutes of free time to wait 2 minutes for a response. How frustrating is that, right? Like, send a tech support response, wait 2 minutes. I did this with T-Mobile the other day, and I think in an hour and a half, I had a 2-minute conversation. But I had to pay attention for an hour and a half to have the 2-minute conversation, right? And that I would have rather had them say, when do you have 15 minutes available, and click on it and just, hey, tomorrow at 9 a.m., I've got 15 minutes. Can we figure it out, dedicated time? And so we're kind of seeing some pushback on that type of instant gratification. It works great, but it doesn't, but it has certain use cases. You got to be really, really careful about how you leverage them.
100%. So Brent pops in. Thanks, Brent, for asking the question. He says, is there any, capitalized any, form of communication you can afford to ignore?
It's a really interesting question upon it. Here's what I will say. What is very important from my perspective, putting myself back in my MSP shoes, we did a very good job of this, is we really had to train our clients about how to communicate with us. We had to train them, and we had to give them the best possible user experience. But we also had to be clear to them what was going to create for them a bad user experience. So there's 2 types. There's direct communications while your clients are communicating. Then there's the communications like, what is the industry or at large, or what is the market telling us, like the social media. No, you can't. I don't think you can ignore any of it. I ignore none of it. I'm constantly looking at all of it. But in terms of how I efficiently run my business, we teach our customers how to interact with us in a way that we can service them and provide them the best customer experience. I used to abhor a text from a key client at 10 o'clock at night. Now I'm like, this is the most inefficient method to get me to go try to get somebody to help you with a solution. And I had to train my clients that we can actually be more efficient if you put a ticket in. It'll get to the right person first. All of those things, right?
The text message is the killer, man. I mean, that's like, hey, he's like, hey, I know this isn't the way we're supposed to do things, but I had your number and I was in binge. I feel like if you've basically, you're not in the business if you haven't gotten that. The late night, 10 p.m., message.
Yeah.
So how much time per month do you think then? So you said like from a SaaS standpoint, you mentioned ConnectWise, you mentioned account managers, you mentioned quarterly business reviews, meetings, follow-ups, that kind of stuff. So the time savings to automate this process should save them X. What is that?
Yeah, no, we're really clear on that. We had 60 to 80 customers in beta before we launched. It was big, and we basically did a survey with a subset of them asking that exact question on our primary use case. And the primary use case was like, let's start with just whether it's a dispatcher or self-dispatched. When you have resources that are scheduling time with clients, regardless of whose time you're wasting, the self-dispatched person or the dispatcher, how much time and energy do you spend with the back and forth emails and phone calls to coordinate schedules if you didn't have to do that anymore? And it was, it varied, but the average was almost right on 2 hours a week. So 2 hours a week per person, right? So if you have 10 people you're scheduling, you have a dispatcher, that's half of the dispatcher's time is spent just trying to coordinate time for 10 people, right? 2 hours times 10, 20 hours. That's half an FTE for 10 people. Or if you have, independently, if you have people self-dispatching, they're wasting 2 hours just trying to coordinate time with clients if they're scheduling with people. That was the average. That's a lot. That's a day a month. Pretty easy math, right? And if you're paying somebody $50,000 a year, what is a day a month costing you? It's expensive. That's expensive time, especially if it's self-dispatch engineers. So that was really, we wanted to ascertain that this was a problem. And we focused first on exactly the same methodology we were talking about. Let's focus first on the MSP and their internal efficiencies and costs, the ROI. Like, start there. It has to make sense. But then what does it carry forward in terms of what they bring to a customer in terms of a user experience? That's not even part of the ROI equation necessarily, but you are the technology provider. Act like it. Like, how do you look like a technology leader with your clients and bring them a great user experience? Last time you had an appointment with a dentist or a doctor, Jerway, one of my partners, just kind of said this to me yesterday. I was like, that is a pretty good point. You get a text or a communication from a doctor or dentist saying, hey, we have an appointment, and there's an expectation without having to call them and do things like, you can literally confirm or reschedule. I mean, since when do doctors have better technologies than IT service providers to manage your appointment and your schedule with them? Like, why are we not doing this better? So we realized we really needed to make it. And there's one other little thing that I would add to this that we found. We didn't really expect it or see it at the beginning, but this has been really powerful because, I've also got Smileback. We're looking at customer satisfaction and sentiment and watching. We've had feedback for folks who put time zest in place because it's a pretty common thing to say, what's your customer's biggest concern or complaint? It's response time, right? You hear that a lot. I'm not saying it's the number one thing, but I'm telling you from the Smileback side, it's the number one word used in terms of feedback is response time, right? Negative or positive. And what happens psychologically when you as the customer are the individual who booked the time. So all of a sudden, was it the MSP's response time that was problematic, or me as the customer? I was given such a perfect experience when I created the ticket to select the time that was available to me that now psychologically, I now owned the time it took to get to the community. So that has been a huge flip. Instead of back and forth, and here I am, I put in a ticket, I've had a phone call, I got an email, I was in a meeting, 2 hours later, I checked the email, I'm pissed off now because that took 2 hours and we haven't even gotten started. And so the phone missed in a voicemail and I'm frustrated instead of me just clicking and saying, yeah, I'm available tomorrow at noon, click. And now it's off the clock. It's off the SLA, customer picked the time, they own that. And that has been I think we didn't anticipate when we built the platform how much of an impact that was going to have on our customers.
No, it's like, so basically what you've done is you've implemented a self-service tool that now shifts the ownership expectation to the other side. I mean, I can't state enough, back to your point a couple times already, biggest challenge with MSPs isn't that the work isn't getting done per se. It's the perception of the communication track back and forth and when, right, they see it. So perception is a killer sometimes. It really, really is. I wish that every MSP took a step back, right? This is one category, right? But I wish every MSP took a step back and said, hey, listen, whether it's their portal experience, whether it's the email, whether it's SMS, Brent actually made a message here saying, but hey, if you send a text message in with a screenshot, that can replace an hour's worth of conversation. Brent, 100% with you, and being able to submit that and collect that up front, or even now the tools that make their cell phone a live camera, right? And you can just see what's happening in action. I really, really can see where, an MSP who's modernized their customer journey and an MSP who's stuck in the past, that is a gap. Because it's not that they're not using the same tools on the back end. It's not that they're not using 365. It's not that they're not using Azure. It's not that they're not using the ticketing system. It's straight up customer expectation and experience, period.
Yep, 100%. And and I'm not saying that all these other to his point, I'm not saying that all these other communication methods don't make sense. And you can't boil the ocean with a single tool, right? So you need to make all of these things work together. So you and I talked about text being the enemy. No, it can work for certainly, but the midnight text saying, I know this is an out-of-band communication, I need help, that shouldn't be part of your process, probably, I would suggest. But that's different than saying, hey, it's a really great tool for me to flip a picture. Yes, doesn't go to our use case, which is like, I need dedicated time with somebody, or somebody needs dedicated time, and I'm going to give the customer the experience of completely saying, when am I available? When am I free? When do I have mental clarity and break in my schedule to sit down and focus on the problem at hand at my convenience, not the MSP's convenience, right? At my convenience. Just so happens to be convenient for the MSP because we're looking at their calendar and making sure that's the case, right? So it's highly efficient. And then once that communication started, so we just actually released, really excited about this, has been a big deal, highly demanded, but Zoom and Teams integrations. So like, boom, calendar request, Microsoft Teams, we're on it, right when the meeting starts. That's beautiful. It was our #1 requested feature. Is like, I just want to be able to like, and here's another thing, we see MSPs working with their customers who are doing the traditional phone call, email, and oftentimes they agree on a time, and guess what the MSP does? They put the time in manage. What does the customer get? Nothing. What percentage of the time does the customer miss that meeting? Very high. It's a lot, right? Yeah. So being able to send them a meeting request with the link to the Zoom or the Teams or the phone number or whatever, and just make sure that, and then getting that reminder, like I gave you the dentist doctor example, being able to get that reminder, be able to say, oop, doesn't work for me anymore, click, change it, cancel it, it's resolved, whatever. And just giving that simple experience is so important.
So what about reoccurring things, right? Hey, you're do a once a month thing, or you do a once a quarter thing, or you do a biannual thing, or what about on-site related stuff, right? How far are you want to enable, like how does this enable the end customer?
We are way down that path. So there's a couple big things we did. We started, like I said, with that original use case of just like, I need either a dispatcher or an engineer, so I need to schedule this appointment type with this client, period. Now, what we did, we use a platform that allows us to just get feedback. People are feature voting and all of that good stuff. And our onboarding process, half of it is like, go here and tell us what you think, because we're building. Like tell us. And we're constantly, which is fun. I get so much joy out of just watching people say, this is awesome, but we'd love to do this too. And we're constantly developing around that feedback. And not, contrary to maybe popular belief, not every software company is that transparent about their feedback and their roadmap. But I love when people are, because it makes it more fun for everybody, I think. You're solving the problem. So the first thing we did is, it's like, hey, anybody on the team could take this issue. Great. We created a thing where you could say anybody on the team could take this issue. And now the beauty is, in terms of response time, when the customer goes to book a time, they're not just seeing Bob's availability, they see the global availability team, we pick the right person. So we started to expand our use case, and you get to like quarterly business reviews or something like that. Workflows, we can create a URL that says, hey, you create a ticket when the dates come to do a QBR. I'm giving you an example. And then automatically kick an email to your customer saying, hey, it's time for our quarterly review. Click here to schedule, purely automated in workflows, right? I mean, beautiful. You don't have to do anything. So talk about change for ConnectWise, right? When they were spending 25% of their time creating emails and sending out like, when can we get together? And it's automated through workflows. One of the more recent features also was, people were like, okay, we're using TimeZest, but we have salespeople or executives who are still using Calendly because they're not really in a ticket. They don't have a service ticket. So now we have a freestanding URL. George wants a half-an-hour phone call with you. Here's your link, and it creates an activity and then syncs to your calendar, so Outlook calendar or whatever. So now that that's integrated, Teams meeting or whatever, it's just basically people are finally able to say, okay, we can just go to one platform instead of using multiple platforms.
No, it's
So we continue
very
to expand.
interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun, and you know, there's a lot of stuff that, like I said, bookings and Calendly were the two I mentioned. I use another one called Book Like a Boss that I love. There's a lot of great tools out there that are interesting, and they all have unique propositions. We're kind of looking at the best of all of them and saying, great, but none of them know what the MSPs are doing and integrate to their workflow and SLAs and all of that stuff. How can we take the best of all of them and do that? That's been fun.
No, that's very interesting. So, of course, it's hard to avoid the reality that not everybody, not every part of an MSP lives in the ERP, PSA, CRM, whatever you want to call it. Case in point, right? I mean, a lot of people have adopted HubSpot or Salesforce on the front end for sales and marketing and prospecting, and they're using the ticketing system for service delivery, right? Or
Yep.
some people like the technology service delivery bubble is one piece of organization, like an accounting firm, right? So they got their tech, service delivery arm from a technology standpoint, which are separate than CPAs, which are separate than other their businesses. So it's starting, the waters are a little bit gray then, right? Because now all of a sudden I have disjointedness happening.
Yep.
Listen, there are a lot of tools out there that claim that they sync data from the left to the right, and some are affordable, some are not. But what is your best recommendation on not sacrificing interconnectiveness to just service these, what we call like shadow IT to a degree, right? Where everybody's deciding what they want for their department.
Yeah, it's been interesting. This is kind of how app sprawl happens, and it's funny. I'm gonna get to your answer, but I used to I used to ask a question when I used to do these kind of keynotes around cloud delivery service, and I used to ask a question: how many of you think when a customer calls and says, "We let Joe Bob go today," that your tier one engineer has shut down every possible app that Joe Bob was using, and not a hand in a room of 500 would go up, right? And the whole conversation was around SSO and all this other whatever, and auto whatever. But the point is like all of a sudden the team's like, hey, look, Slack's free, and you guys have Office 365, and all of a sudden this group over here is using Slack to communicate. That's how Slack, by the way, that's how Slack became Slack. I mean, they didn't go over the decision makers. They went to like individuals and departments that wanted something, and then they grew organically from the bottom up by free for a certain size, and they're still doing it that way. And they're not the only tool. So people do these one-off solutions. What we've seen at times is we run into smaller organizations that are a little more disjointed, not all of them, but some of them can be a little more disjointed in how they buy. But then several of the largest MSPs and ConnectWise themselves are customers that go through a more centralized purchasing and manage that stuff in a much better way. What we find is it's really not a matter of size necessarily, it's operational maturity. As you have more operational maturity, you have controls in place on how people purchase and keep this sprawl from happening. And frankly, since COVID started, I would say, and I think you'd agree, the attention to rogue apps and expenses, the hammer came down. Like if you weren't providing some value, and if you weren't like kind of central to the use, I mean, you were weeded out. So that's happened as well. It just feels like everybody kind of stepped up their game a bit in terms of financial controls over the last few months, which I think is great. I mean, it's really kind of made you have to prove it. You gotta be good at what you do, or you're not going to be in there. Yeah.
Oh, fair enough. One of the last thoughts that really come to my mind as we're in the home stretch is part of the reason that I think the IT Nation swiper fatigue, I call it. I'm going to copyright that at some point. Just joking. The IT Nation swiper fatigue is that it's too complicated to deploy. And so they get to a certain point and then they just give up, right? They're just like, I got other shit to do. So how, from a UI, UX, app builder, SaaS mentality, right? Setup has to be one of the biggest challenges. Well,
yeah. Or fortunately for for TimeZest, it couldn't be easier, but it is like, so, you know, I'm an EOS implementer, a consultant strategist, and there's two things that we talk about in terms of marketing strategy to overcome risk to close a deal, any deal. Two things you have to overcome, and this is true in any business. This isn't software providers. MSP should be thinking of this with their clients. It's exactly the same thing. And from an EOS perspective, they have two things. One's called the proven process, and one's called the guarantee. There's two things people risk when they say yes to someone: money and time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the proven process from so guarantees guarantee money back, blah, blah, blah. You mitigate their risk from a financial perspective, but the proven process is all about mitigating my investment and getting set up and integrated and getting my customers onboarded and that piece. So long way of answering the question. Yeah, this is where many people get hung up on all of these solutions. It is not easy to replace your PSA. People don't make that change a lot. The time investment's way beyond the monetary investment. It's crazy. You're changing your whole system, right? But bringing in a tool like TimeZest, fortunately, is like a 5-minute exercise. It's couldn't be easier, but we have to show that, right? People don't know that inherently coming in. It goes back a little bit to the whole story brand exercise I was talking about on the website. Like, what's your proven process? Create, your API member and connect it and schedule an appointment. Done, right? And you want to make that look as simple as possible. Fortunately for TimeZest, it's that simple. We've seen other SaaS providers try to enter the channel that it's too complicated. It takes them too long to even explain what they do, let alone how to onboard. And that can be a problem. So and I think just for your listeners, it's interesting to think of that in terms of an MSP selling to a customer. It's something that we struggled with for a long time at Arterian, which is like, how do the money was one thing, but they're like, oh my God, I have to switch IT providers. What does that look like? And for a long time, it was hard for us to explain. It's simple. And here's the tools we have. We're going to come in, we're going to do this, assessment, and we've got tools that'll do it. We're going to take any of your time. You won't even notice when we switch your RMM. It's all automated. And we'll come out and have a nice little meeting with you. And you have to have a clear, concise process that de-risks the entire thing from a time and investment perspective for them to say yes. So it's the same for our SaaS providers when they talk to their customers, right? And
100%.
But the proof's in the pudding, because if you say it's going to be easy and it's not, so that's a problem.
Wow. To Brent, that's right to your point, right? MSPs are great at monitoring stuff. Yeah. But they suck at keeping people up to date. Yeah, it's so
communication.
True.
It's all communication.
Yeah, I would almost argue that, and Dave Sobel, he's pretty topical guy these days because he just puts out what he thinks, which is to a degree very good. One of his I think he had one yesterday, the day before, which was, does your end customers care the brands, logos, and hammers in your tool chest? Most of the time, no. Like they expect a result, they expect an outcome, right? And it's kind of up to you as an MSP to figure out what the best answer is, so that they get there.
This is like solution selling instead of product selling, right? Like I could sell Dell or HP, or I could sell whatever. All of my clients, give me a working computer and a working firewall. They didn't care what the brand was on the computer or the firewall. They wanted to work. But it has to meet the experience, right? So you go back to the experience. It's solutions over products. And that's an age-old adage, but it's becoming more and more and more clear. And now those solutions, they're not just, the traditional hardware and software perspective. What's the bevy of things that we can do in this experience, especially where now not everybody, but most everybody's sitting at home. Like, how do we deliver this experience to them that is so conducive to their workflow? And it's not about a logo. It's not about that. It's just like, how do we make this as smooth as possible? Don't make me have to think, right? Now with my new computer that you and I were talking about, it's much easier for me than when I had a little tiny. All these solutions we're trying to throw at people to make sure that they're effective and efficient, right?
Well, to some degree, we'll start where or kind of end where we started. You didn't just buy Tesla. You swapped out your Audi for your Teslas, right? You wanted to drive a computer. but they made it really, really easy to do, right? Like they made
Most
it,
salespeople,
like
they
you
buy it
said,
online with one click of a button. It's like buying something from Amazon. Buying a Tesla was like, you just click the button. It was weird. I'll tell you, I bought a lot of cars in my life, and you can navigate and negotiate and all that. Talk about turning industry upside down. It was so it wasn't just the technology in the car, but I mean, even that experience was just uniquely different, right? I mean, it's just uniquely different. And
you did,
sometimes you gotta buck the system. I'd say
you
Elon's
know,
done that.
I'm all about bucking the system. I love that.
Yes, you are.
Jamison, where do people so you have multiple companies, right? Just to be clear for everyone, because it's been on more. Jamison works with a company called ConnectStrat, right? EOS, Entrepreneurs Operating System Consultants. And there's Smileback, that is the CSAT, Customer Satisfaction, and NPS, Net Promoter Score app, right?
Yep. Yep.
And then today we're talking about TimesS, which is this auto scheduling, simple communication tool. So I guess where do they find you across the board?
Yeah, well, it's any of the above, but really for today's topic, just Jamison, Jamison, Jamison at timesS.com. But I'm happy to talk to you on any of those subjects above. And you can, I've got a lot of email addresses and calendars, just to, and that's the other, that's why I like some of these products that are really cater to people who work and wear different hats. But yeah, Jamison at timesS.com is a great way to reach me, regardless of the subject. I'm good on email. So
there you go. I appreciate you for jumping on board. I may be in your neck of the woods maybe soon. I'll let you know. Surprisingly, we'll see.
Everything's subject or tentative or whatever these days.
I know. Well, you just never know. Every day is different now. But appreciate you for hopping on board. Thanks everybody for watching. This session was recorded, so if you ever want to go back and rewind, you'll find it on mspinitiative.com. Please continue to join us at 1 o'clock Eastern on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Catch up soon.
All right. Thanks, George. Bye-bye.